Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the February 20th, 2022 episode of the Boxing Source Radio Show. I am your host, James Bell, the leader of the Boxing Source. You can catch us through social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Follow us. We would greatly appreciate it. We also do have the YouTube channel where you could catch interviews, various interviews, such as our recent ones there with Albert Bell and Franchon Cruz Discern that's on the YouTube page right now. So check those out. You'll really enjoy those. But you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. We would really appreciate that as well. For this particular podcast, we got a good number of things that we'll talk about, particularly what happened on Friday and Saturday night. We had action on Friday night, and we had action on Saturday night. And then we'll look ahead to what's on the schedule for February 26th as we have the undisputed super lightweight champion putting his belts on the line. And also we have a fairly stacked card that will be on Showtime for you to watch out for. So that is mainly what we are going to be covering in this particular episode. Hopefully we cover all of that within a good duration and, touch on all the subjects there with good precision. So we're going to get right at it. We got to go over to the UK, right? And of course, you had the big bout, Manchester Arena, as you finally had the long-awaited rivalry come to a head in the ring with Amir Khan and Kell Brook. Amir Khan, of course, the decorated guy over in the UK, coming from a Pakistani background, went to the Olympics and everything like that. And had a fairly good career, particularly in the 140-pound division. Did have some fights from 147, went up to 160 at one point in the fight. Canelo, and we know what happened there. Then went back down. But he had, like I said, an okay career. Didn't win a title, a world championship at 147. But had challenged for the welterweight title, the middleweight title, among others. But he came in there, with a record of 34 wins and 5 losses. And his opponent, the special one, as they call him, Kell Brook, went in there with a record of 39-3. Of course, he was the IBF welterweight champion at one point, defeating Sean Porter, getting the win over Sean Porter by decision. And he also moved up from the welterweight to the middleweight division to fight that guy, Gennady Golovkin. Ended up getting stopped. Went back down to welterweight, faced Errol Spence Jr. for that IBF welterweight championship and got stopped there. And also had a fight against Terrence Crawford, back in 2020, and ended up getting stopped in that one, So he had that record of 39 wins, 3 losses, and got stopped, in all of those losses. So going into this particular bout, you had, Kell Brook, of course, with his issues with the eye socket, having the, titanium plate and everything like that. Amir Khan, with the majority of the losses that he had, he ended up getting stopped in almost all of them. So it was a fight that was long awaited over there in the UK, but, of course, it was like 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 years too late or something like that for some people. But in the UK, they were really interested in this particular bout. Manchester Arena was sold out in about an hour and a half or something like that. So, even though both of the guys may be considered way past their primes and things like that, the fans over in the UK were really waiting for this particular bout to happen. And going into it, it was more about, who would kind of like falter first. And the thing about it is that in the first round, we kind of got a little bit of a message of what was to come as Kell Brook, was going off his front foot, very consistent with his jab, more accurate with his jab, and more accurate with his power shots. And Amir Khan got rocked in that first round. Had some issues as far as like his footing, and he had uh, those similar issues throughout this particular bout. And you really didn't see much coming from Amir Khan as far as like really affecting Kell Brook and what Kell Brook was doing there in the ring. I did see that Amir Khan had been preparing for this particular bout with the trainer or the tutelage of Brian Bomac McIntyre. And yes, the WBO welterweight champion Terrence Crawford was in the camp there with Amir Khan. But that particular preparation ahead of this particular bout wasn't really much for Amir Khan at all. He had some of the tools that he has had over the course of his career, but not anything that could really affect Kell Brook in this particular matchup. He wasn't as accurate with his jabs and the combination punching, even though he was a faster fighter, but he wasn't the more accurate fighter. And so Kell Brook just, stayed patient, stayed consistent in his approach against Amir Khan, and he was able to, affect Amir Khan over the course of rounds, breaking him down round by round and stuff like that. Had, like I said, seriously hurt him in the first round. Had some moments there in the fourth round and in the fifth, and in the sixth round, it was another combination that had sent Amir Khan back to the ropes, and this was like at the beginning of that sixth round that set Amir Khan backwards, and it just was a little bit more as far as like the combinations there by Kell Brook that forced referee Victor Laughlin to stop the bout within a minute of that sixth round, giving Kell Brook the victory for him to score the 40th win of his professional career, registers as his 28th victory by KO or stoppage. And this was, to him, it just seemed like it was immediately his most satisfying victory. I mean, even more than him winning that IBF title against Sean Porter years back. I think that was like back in, like 2014, right? And, he had the win there in 2014, had defended the belt a few times before going up against Golovkin and Errol Spence. But, after that, he only had like about a few fights before he fought for the WBO welterweight championship and, lost by stoppage to Terrence Crawford. But he wanted that fight against Amir Khan, and he was able to finally get it here in 2022. And he just was way too much for Amir Khan, or, on the flip side, it just didn't really look like Amir Khan had anything at all there for Kell Brook. So you do have Kell Brook winning by stoppage. Was I would say a fairly easy victory. Some could say it was a fairly easy victory there for Kell Brook. But we'll talk about more in reference to what Kell Brook may do here in the near future. But I'm gonna get analysis here from another guest coming in here right now, contributor to the Boxing Source Radio Show. That's right, it is the boxing academic in the building. What's going on?
Hey, what's going on, James? How you doing today, man?
All good, man. All good. Just starting off here with the Khan versus Brook fight. Kell Brook getting that stoppage victory, and kind of like being very gratified in reference to that. It's kind of like a closure in a sense to him, because it was like all those years he felt like he was the better fighter or better than Amir Khan. Had really tried to go ahead and try to get that fight with Amir Khan over the years, but never really got it. So it took this long for him to get this particular bout with his grudge match with Amir Khan. And, like I said at the start, both guys, might, say are way past their best, but, Kell Brook just said that he was, much more, I would say, fresher to in a sense than Amir Khan was, because Amir Khan really just couldn't do much of anything in this particular fight against Kell Brook here. So that's what I got out of that off the rip. What did you think about it, man?
So I only saw the highlights. I didn't actually catch the fight, but from the highlights, yeah, it looked like a one-sided fight from the highlights. I definitely have a short-sighted view, but I would like to liken this to. So you made a comment. Kell Brook over all the years had this sort of, thing on his shoulder to where he's like he wants to prove that he's the best. And I would ask, is it the same thing? Excuse me one second.
Mm.
Is it? I'm sorry. Is it the same? I thought I had to sneeze. Is it the same thing that happened between Roy Jones Jr. and Bernard Hopkins? If they both would have fought in their prime, where Amir Khan still had his speed, would we get a different outcome based upon Amir Khan being able to use his speed? Yeah, we all know his chin, suspect. Maybe Kell Brook would have caught up to him. But would it have been the same sort of vibe that it was with Roy Jones and Bernard Hopkins? Because let's just say Roy Jones and Bernard Hopkins didn't fight when they were younger and they fought when they were older. What would be the prevailing thought on that? Knowing what we know now, when they fought when they were older, because that would have happened anyway. Let's say they didn't fight when they were younger and they only fought when they were older, and the outcome happened. What would have been the prevailing thought?
My thing would be this. Hold on. The thing with Roy Jones was like when they initially fought, both fighters were, at middleweight. And it was like, not soon after that, Roy Jones ended up going up in weight. Having the thing a little stint at super middleweight before having that light heavyweight reign, where he was, undisputed champ there, like light heavyweight and whatnot. While, for so many years, Bernard Hopkins had stayed at middleweight and eventually became the undisputed middleweight champion. So it wasn't like, until much later in Bernard Hopkins' career where he ended up going to light heavyweight. So I'm not sure, where it would have been at, probably at super middleweight, but the level that Roy Jones was at super middleweight to light heavyweight or whatnot, it was kind of like levels above. I kind of like liken it to when Roy Jones fought James Toney. James Toney was technically sound, so to speak, was a very, very, very good fighter there, at that particular point, but it was just a whole different thing there when it came to when he fought Roy Jones there at the super middleweight division, and that kind of like is what I kind of like liken it to, is more like a Roy Jones and Bernard Hopkins. I mean, not Roy Jones and Bernard, but Roy Jones and James Toney.
So didn't they fight 3 times? Roy Jones won the first time, and then Bernard Hopkins won the last 2 times?
No, they only fought twice.
Oh, twice.
Yeah.
Okay, I may be thinking of
Roy Jones
Tarver,
and Antonio Tarver, yeah.
Tarver, yeah. Tarver won by knockout the last 2 times, right?
No, he won by knockout in the second one, and it was decision in the third one because the third one was in Tampa. You know,
And the first one, what happened? The first one.
first one, Jones won by decision.
Okay. I mean, Tarver, that's even difficult. So I was assuming that I thought Bernard Hopkins won twice, but nevertheless, if they would have fought again, Bernard Hopkins still would have won. So all I'm saying is, if you judge them fighting when they were older, one would say that Bernard Hopkins is the better fighter. I get what you're saying if you take weight class into account, but let's keep it on the single level. Let's not add in the details that make my story not actually be true or not even be plausible. But I'm just saying, La La Land to prove my point. They fought when they were older. Bernard Hopkins was his skill overshadowed Roy Jones's skill when Roy Jones's his technique overshadowed Roy Jones's technique when Roy Jones's skill sort of diminished his like natural skill. God-given talents type thing, skill and talent. That's what I mean to say. So if we take that, we'll say that Bernard Hopkins was better, later. But in reality, Roy Jones was the more talented fighter, but who had the longer longevity, who had the greater longevity. So could this be a case of Amir Khan waiting too late and getting past his prime to what made him do better and be better? And in that case, Kell Brook gonna win 7-8 times out of 10. But if they would have fought earlier, the fact that he had all that speed kills, could that have been the case?
I mean, I'm trying to figure out like what would have been a good time there. Like if it was like that fight could have happened like within that point of 2014 and 2016, when both of those guys were around there in the welterweight division, and Amir Khan could have fought, Kell Brook, and that could have been, just have that as a voluntary defense for that IBF title before, the mandatory was called for Errol Spence. But Amir Khan went to the direction of, fighting Canelo Alvarez. That was like in May of that year. And, that same year, 2016 was, September was when Brook ended up fighting Gennady Golovkin. So they could have had that, instance in 2016 where they could have fought and we could have been like, what if they would have fought at that particular juncture? And at that
I
point,
still would give it to Kell.
Even in 2016?
Yeah, because what he showed against Errol Spence, even in losing, even in Gennady Golovkin in losing, like he he had a good account. He just didn't have enough firepower.
Right.
And physically he couldn't take enough, and his firepower overshadowed what his body couldn't take.
Right. And I think, with both of those guys, Golovkin and Spence being, naturally, I would say naturally bigger than Kell Brook, that, they just overpowered Kell Brook, over in the latter portion of the fight. Was, more of like Kell Brook not being able to get away from both of those guys. And they ended up breaking them down and then later stopping Kell Brook. But, someone like an Amir Khan who, he initially had his success in lower weight classes, but, he had never won a world championship at 147. I mean, that kind of like says a lot. As notable as Amir Khan is to, a lot of people, he had never won a world championship at 147, and, with that, I think that kind of like affects his career because, with 147 being like the glamour division and being one of the glamour divisions for like decades, you would think that Amir Khan would have tried to define himself at that particular division, but he didn't necessarily do that. he kind of had the what was it? At that instance, he could have had a point where he could have potentially fought like a Timothy Bradley, but Timothy Bradley ended up signing with Top Rank at the time to get Manny Pacquiao. So for Amir Khan's sake, I don't see why he wouldn't try to go after Kell Brook when he in those years tried to position for a fight against Floyd Mayweather, which that wasn't really going to happen. So there was that.
This was after Kell Brook beat Sean Porter, correct?
Yeah, it was after that because Brook beat Porter in 2014.
So to answer your question, why he wouldn't go after that? Did you see the guy that beat Sean Porter? Like, it was a competitive fight. Like, I don't remember the particulars, but I do remembering like, I'm leaning toward Kell, but I think that they might favor the home fighter here.
I mean, it was a sloppy fight in a sense, but Kell Brook ended up edging that out, and him kind of like getting that particular decision. That was like a majority decision, one judge gave Kell Brook 9 rounds in that particular fight. I thought it was crazy, but like I said, it was 2 accidental headbutts in that particular bout, and Kell Brook just kind of like outboxed Sean Porter to a certain extent in that fight. But after that, I would have thought that Amir Khan could have tried to go after Kell Brook and could have, they could have had that particular fight, so to speak, that could have really, boosted up the UK atmosphere, so to speak, as far as like building up to that fight, as far as like how much money they could have gotten for the fight at that particular juncture. But Amir Khan just didn't want to visit that particular fight at that stage.
A fight that I think could make Amir Khan some money. He probably will get knocked out. I mean, where he's at, he probably needs to just stop boxing because the level that he would fight would be, let's build a name off of him. He would fight fighters the way they put the names off him. But I'm saying the fight that I think they could. You tell me. Amir Khan, Danny Garcia too.
Danny Garcia stops him again.
And that's what I'm saying. I think he does, but out of all the people that's coming up, who does he have the best chance of probably not getting stopped and at least going 12 rounds with? Maybe not even Danny Garcia, but I'm just saying Danny Garcia older, so that's got to give him something. I don't know. He probably gonna get. Yeah, you're right. He probably gonna get stopped. But I mean, everybody else, you can't put him up against Boots. That's like not cool. You can't put him up against anybody else that's in that. Keith Thurman would knock him out. I mean, who could you put him up with in the upper tier of welterweight that he at least could last 12 rounds with?
Now that I don't see who that could be. You go through, like I said, you got Errol Spence, you got, of course, Terrence Crawford, he already fought. You got Keith Thurman, you got your Dennis Ugas, you got Boots Ennis, you got Virgil Ortiz, you got, maybe like Conor Ben. You really don't have that many options out there for Amir Khan to where he would make money. Only other thing would be, a Conor Ben fight, maybe. But Conor Ben, like I had talked about this earlier, like Conor Ben shouldn't really venture into fighting the likes of a Kell Brook or, an Amir Khan at this particular juncture. Like, he's undefeated. He's had a string of good wins over the past 4 fights that he's had, so why not continue that momentum and try to get yourself in a position to fight for a world title later on down the line? Not talking about fights against Amir Khan or Kell Brook or Adrian Broner. Like, nah, that that really doesn't do much. I know that, like a fight against David Invasion probably doesn't move the needle as far as like money is concerned, but like what do you get from, fighting these other guys? Yeah, could be the money, but outside of that, what else does it do for you? You know?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Um, the thing is, if they trying to springboard him and get him in the real conversation, I'd say having somebody like that on his resume is a good springboard for that. Even though all of them are shells of themselves, I don't think Adrian Broner would get stopped. He at least, well, I don't know. Adrian Broner getting old too now, so
Yeah, but the thing is, like you said, Adrian Broner's never been stopped. Even in his losses, he's never been stopped.
but he getting old though. He you think he can do the same stuff he has been? Well, I guess making sure you don't get knocked out is a skill in itself, but how long can you keep going to that well before you get in front of a little young lion that motor keep going and your motor just only going at half like speed?
Right. But the thing with with Broner is like it's just that he's been a high profile fighter, for a lot of years. He's had, a good number of notable fights over the course of his career, but it's not like he's up that far in age, though. You know what I mean?
True.
Um, so think about it is that he just had all of those particular fights, very very early in his career. So that's the thing with him, man. You know.
And I am probably overrating Conor Ben because he hadn't been tested. Like, sure, Chris Algieri, okay, is a good stepping stone, but we need to see him face some adversity. He hadn't faced that yet. Until he faced some adversity, it'd be very difficult for me to truly say what he gonna do.
Right. Yeah. And thinking about it is like with Conor Ben, it's not like they're putting him in against like a like a Drawn Boots in this. I mean, maybe he could be in the ring against Jamal James or something like that. Jamal James had the WBA regular welterweight title. Before he ended up losing to Radzab Batayev. So why not have Conor Ben face someone like that? You know, that could really measure or see where he's at in the welterweight division. If he's not going to fight, uh, David Evangian, I think Evangian's with another promotional company, rival promotional company. So that fight might not happen, but still, for Conor Ben, he has to figure out how to get himself in a position to be a viable contender for a world title. I mean, that's what these other young fighters are doing. That's what Boots Ennis is doing. That's what Virgil Ortiz Jr. is doing. So why not Conor Ben? So there's that. On the note, back to Kell Brook. Like, yeah, he has this win over Amir Khan. It's kind of like a career defining win according to him. He had really been considering retirement after getting this win, but now it seems like he could maybe continue his career for a fight or two. One opponent that has been suggested is Chris Eubank Jr., but that would be at the middleweight division. I know that this particular fight between Brook and Khan was a little bit north of 147 pounds, but having Kell Brook going up to 160 once again to fight someone like a Chris Eubank, maybe that might not be a good option for him. But if the money is right, according to him, he will probably go for it. So there's that as a potential option for Kell Brook. For Amir Khan, I think that he's kind of like did all he could do there at welterweight, and he had been considering retirement, so maybe he just says, hey, look, this might be it. there isn't really much else that I could do in the sport. So I might as well, just wrap it up. You know what I'm saying? So, I think that might be the direction there for Amir Khan or whatnot. Um, going past that, you had like another fight that was on the zone. Was Jaime Munguia against D'Mitrius Ballard. Jaime Munguia, former WBO 154-pound champion. Like I was saying when this fight was announced, I was like, why isn't Jaime Munguia challenging for a world title at this point? Went up against Demetrius Ballard. Demetrius Ballard is, from Prince George's County, undefeated going into the bout. I think it was like 21 wins, 0 losses, and 1 draw. He was involved in the undercard for Jaime Munguia versus Gabe Rosado, where he was able to get a win there. But here against Jaime Munguia, he was doing pretty well in the first couple of rounds, was landing well with the jab and a couple of right hands and working the body pretty well of Jaime Munguia. But then Jaime Munguia was able to respond and just blitz Demetrius Ballard in the third round, knock him down with a good shot. Ballard was able to get up. I don't know how he was able to get up. I thought it was seriously hurt from those shots that he took initially. He was able to get up from that. But then, Jaime Munguia got him to the ropes and threw a combination, and the referee, Juan Jose Ramirez, stepped in and stopped the bout, within a 1 minute and 47 seconds in the third round. So Jaime Munguia is now 39-0 with 31 wins by way of knockout, and he's still up there as the top contender in the WBO. He is also the number one contender in the WBC, but I don't know when he is ever going to step up and fight for a world title. I think it might happen for the WBO if we actually get an announcement that the current WBO middleweight champion, Demetrius Andrade, moves up to 168 pounds and fights Zach Parker. And if that happens, then you could have Jaime Munguia there fighting, who is it, Zanabek or Nimhanuli or whatever it is, for the vacant WBO title. But I'm like, Jaime Munguia has been in the middleweight division for a good while now, man. It's been, about a couple years or so. He had been the top contender for, that whole time and hadn't, fought for a world championship. So him in the middleweight division, I think it's like he's trying to wait it out to see if the likes of, like Demetrius Andrade moving up to 168, someone like Jamal Charlo moving up to 168, and then whatever happens with Gennady Golovkin, that he may end up moving up to 168 later this year. And I guess Jaime Munguia is just waiting for all of that to happen first before he steps up and tries to fight for a world title. But in the meantime, he was able to have a fight over in his home country in Mexico. There, as he is actually from Tijuana, Mexico, so he had a hometown fight against Demetrius Ballard, gets a third round stoppage victory. And like I said, I mean, he has almost 40 fights and only had that one instance where he won the super welterweight title over Saddam Ali 4 years ago. But since then, it's kind of like he's been, collecting wins, but nothing very notable or over the top to kind of like say, okay, wow, he could really be a serious contender for being a top guy in the 160-pound division. It'll have to wait until all of those guys that hold the world titles either move up or, maybe retire or something like that. So that's the thing with Jaime Munguia. Any thoughts about that kid from Tijuana and what he could possibly do in the middleweight division?
I mean, I honestly don't care. But what I will say is that they were ripening D'Mitrius Ballard up for Jaime, and looking at his style and just, like you could tell it was only a certain level he could go to. So they were just preparing him to, to go in there and make it a run-of-the-mill day, and Jaime Munguia keep moving. Anything next for Jaime? I mean, Jaime ain't really fought nobody for real. Did he lose once, or he won all his fights?
He's won all his fights, 39-0.
Yeah, Jaime got to fight somebody, and that'll be some stuff if he actually go up and get Demetrius Andrade belt when he leave. Yeah, I mean Jaime. Okay, let me give Jaime some praise. Jaime's getting better. He didn't show his getting better last fight because there was really no need to. But the fight before, you can see that he actually working on his head movement. Obviously, the dude got a good motor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he gonna stay far away from Golovkin. Canelo probably wouldn't even waste his time on him. Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to see Jaime fight somebody.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is, like I said, they already have the 160-pound division kind of like booked up. Well, maybe we're waiting on the announcement for, Gennady Golovkin there to face Ryota Murata over in Japan. And like I said, we had the thing with Demetrius Andrade. They're trying to see when he'll end up facing Zach Parker later this year. They're at 168. And then, with Jamal Charlo, Jamal Charlo, he had been considered as a potential opponent for Canelo Alvarez this year. Yeah, he had the thing that stemmed up from what happened in the past with a family member that came back up here. But we've had those particular things happen with fighters before, and they were still able to get fights and able to still get high profile fights. So whatever they have with Jamal Charlo, that could get cleared up, and you could still potentially have Jamal Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez in May. But who knows? Seem like Canelo will end up facing D'Mitrius Ballard in May 7th, and then in September, Gennady Golovkin, and then still have the fight with Jamal Charlo in 2023. But in a sense, you still have in this middleweight division a few of those guys that are out there, and things hadn't necessarily been cleared up as far as like, okay, we hadn't had a unification bout at 100 pounds since Canelo has left that division. So why not, try to have more of these fighters go up against each other, and having Golovkin versus Murata be that only unification bout at middleweight kind of like says a lot there. So that kind of like leaves a lot to be desired there in the middleweight division. You know what I mean? So there is that. There also was like some.
If you're speaking, I can't hear you.
Right, hold on just a second. Look like had something going on there. So yeah, we had talked about the thing with the middleweight division, um, and how there hadn't been that many unification bouts there at 160 pounds, and now we had the whole thing with Gennady Golovkin and Ryota Murata, and outside of that, you really haven't had much as far as like what went down there in the middleweight division. Jaime Munguia is there. They say that he is like a top 10 fighter at 160, but outside of those champions, you really don't have that much depth there at 160 pounds. That was a thing there that we had as far as like what's going on. So Jaime Munguia having his win over D'Mitrius Ballard, maybe doesn't necessarily move the needle too much. There was a little bit of an incident, so to speak, at the weigh-in the day before, where it said like, Jaime Munguia had struggled to get down to that 160-pound limit, and soon after that weigh-in, he had to lay down, had to, get himself rehydrated, almost was, in the hospital getting checked out or something like that. But outside of that, it didn't really take him that much to get himself back into it. And it was like a 3-round victory, or 3-round stoppage there for Demetrius. I mean, not for Demetrius Ballard, but for Jaime Munguia. And like I said, he stays undefeated. He's now 39-0, so he's, I guess he's going to see what happens with the situation with the WBO first, as the WBO had ordered Demetrius Andrade to fight Zanabek as his next mandatory, which, I just found that to be interesting that, they had done that since Jaime Munguia had been the number one contender, for all of those years, and had been the former WBO champion at 154. So that usually puts you in position to fight for the world title in the next division up. So with Jaime Munguia, I guess not really going for fighting for that world title, that kind of like affects things there in reference to that. So that kind of like has a bearing as to what happens there in the middleweight division. And moving forward, wanted to kind of like go into what's on slate next week. You do have Josh Taylor defending his titles against Jack Catterall. That's for the undisputed super lightweight titles. You also have Chris Colbert. That's supposed to get himself in the ring. He was supposed to fight Roger Gutierrez, and that was supposed to be for the WBA belt. They're at 130 pounds, but with Roger Gutierrez, now out due to a positive COVID test. Now looks like Chris Colbert will be in the ring next week there against Hector Garcia. Hector Garcia is, kind of like rated, I think it's number 5 in the WBA rankings. They're at 130 pounds. But, it's not quite, what Chris Colbert was, looking for as far as like him trying to be the world champion there at that particular weight class. So we may have to, wait a little bit more to fight Roger Gutierrez, as they wanted to keep that particular date there for that fight card. You also have Gary Antoine Russell going up against former champion at 140 pounds, Victor Postal. And that is one of the bouts that I'm looking forward to, is Gary Antoine Russell against Victor Postal, to see where Gary Russell is at this particular point. Victor Postal is, ranked in a few of these sanctioning bodies. Um, and like I said, I mean, he's there 31 wins, 3 losses, losing to Terrence Crawford, losing to Jose Carlos Ramirez. I think it was also Josh Taylor that was able to beat him. So this one here for Gary Antoine Russell could be something really good for him. Also is very solid, very technically sound. So we have to see where Gary Antoine is at this particular juncture in his career, as he kind of waits to see what happens with the titles at 140 pounds there. So there is that. Boxing Academic, are you still here with us? Let me see.
Yes, I am.
All right, gotcha. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. It was like a little bit of a snafu or something. I don't know, man. Somebody like hacked the computer or something. I don't know. But yeah, we back in it. And like I said, that's mainly the schedule that's there ahead of us for February 26th. I mean, one thing I mean that's all I'm kind of like looking at here for that next weekend is mainly the Josh Taylor fight. As he says, like he's gonna have this one fight, and then we got to see if he's gonna stay at 140 pounds or move up to 147. And the thing there with Gary Antoine Russell and Victor Postal, um, I mean, I want to see if Gary Antoine Russell is able to, showcase his skills there against Victor Postal. Maybe he ends up stopping Victor Postal. See what that would mean as far as like sending a message there in the 140-pound division, which is, fairly deep. There you do have Subio Matias there in that particular division. You still have Regis Prograis hanging around there at 140. You have even though he went up to 147, Mario Barrios is still up there. Jose Zepeda's there with Jose Carlos Ramirez. Uh, even Teofimo Lopez says that he wants to campaign there at 140 pounds. You also have Brandon Lee, Montana Love there at 140. A good number of fighters there at 140 pounds there, which includes Gary Antoine Russell. So for the next 6 to 18 months, we're going to see how the 140-pound division shapes itself out there. So there is that. One thing as far as like boxing talk that had been hitting the waves over the course of the past week and a half was one thing that former two-time welterweight champion and current commentator and podcaster himself, Showtime Sean Porter, he had made a comment in one of his previous podcasts that he made the statement in reference to Jerome Boots Ennis, that Jerome Boots Ennis is overrated. And that had really sent like shockwaves over the course of the boxing stratosphere, so to speak. Because, of course, Boots Ennis is there undefeated, very talented fighter. Had really kind of like shown out in his previous, past few bouts, so to speak. And is kind of like on the verge of, facing or fighting for a world title. They're trying to, set up that bout between him and Casil Clayton for the mandatory spot in the IBF rankings. And if he has that fight and he wins that fight, then he would be the IBF mandatory. Of course, IBF belt is held by Errol Spence Jr. And Errol Spence has his bout April 16th against Yordenis Ugas. And if he gets through that particular bout and is the unified champ with 3 belts, he may have a choice of either trying to go after Terrence Crawford for undisputed, or IBF may call for that mandatory challenge for Errol Spence to face Jerome Businis. And thing about it is, Errol Spence hasn't really had that many mandatory defenses of the IBF title. If I'm not mistaken, he had fought Carlos Ocampo, and that was a mandatory defense there, so to speak, for the IBF belt. But ever since then, he has had his fights. What was it? Of course, he had the Danny Garcia, Mikey Garcia, and Sean Porter. So ever since that particular bout with Carlos Ocampo, he really has not had a IBF mandatory defense. They had held it back for a few years or so, and the guy that was the IBF mandatory, Abdul ended up losing to Cody Crowley last year. So Abdul is removed from those IBF rankings, and now it's just a matter of, okay, who's the top rated contenders out there? And Jerome Butsinis is up there around the top of those rankings. And you also have Virgil Ortiz as a highly ranked contender there. Connor Benn is in there, but also Casio Clayton. So all of those guys are undefeated. Virgil Ortiz is facing Micah Mckinson on March 19th. We already talked about Connor Benn, so he's kind of like out of it. So there's Casio Clayton, and that's how that particular bout has kind of like sorted itself out. So we got to see how that is going to be formally announced. And like I said, if Boots Ennis gets that belt and wins that belt, then he's going to be the IBF number one contender. And the IBF usually is very strict when it comes to their mandatory challengers, but it's just that for the welterweight division, it hadn't quite been the case, so to speak. So there is that. But Boxing Academic, any comments about what Sean Porter said about Boots Ennis? Before I elaborate on that and what's happening with the IBF situation.
I can't speak on the polarizing he's overrated, but what I will say, if we judge everybody off of their potential and what they could do, it'd be a lot of greats in the world, So my same comment to whoever I said it earlier, maybe it was Jaime. Maybe no, it wasn't Jaime. It was whoever I said didn't face any adversity.
Connor Benn,
yeah. I say the same thing for Boots Ennis. I got to see, okay, it's a little bit easier to say because he has a lot of physical attributes. And I would just go to say that his athleticism might translate on the basketball court if I just had to, guess. At the same time, yeah, we got to see him show and prove. We got to see him do something. And until then, it's speculation. I wouldn't go so far to say that he overrated, because he better than a lot of other prospects to where he getting mentioned as a contender with the amount of like the body of work he has. He getting mentioned as a contender with the body of work. Could that mean it's too premature? Maybe. Or it could just mean that his skill level dictates what people say, like, okay, you this good. Let's see how good you are. But until he fights somebody, we can't crown him. And I'm pretty consistent with that with anybody. I was saying this with Errol Spence a couple years ago, Terrence Crawford up until recently.
Yeah.
He got to fight somebody.
Yeah, and the thing is like, I kind of like talked about it. The term usually, well, it's not really overrated. Probably should have said like unproven. And the thing about it is that, the guys that, he's kind of like went through, some people might not like kind of rate those guys that high in the welterweight division. Um, so thing about it is that uh, yeah, we do have to see Boots Ennis against, I guess, one of these more proven guys or whatever it is. But at this particular juncture, I'm not sure if those guys will do that unless if it's a situation where there is no choice. You know, I'm not seeing, a Keith Thurman doing that. Even before, Sean Porter retired, I wasn't seeing Sean Porter doing that. The thing about it is like, yo, why would they go do that when they could, fight for a world title if they could fight for a world title and get the money that they would want to get? In comparison to fighting the Boots Ennis, that'll be less money. That if they end up losing, that really takes them down the pecking order. And if they lose badly, then that really takes them down the pecking order. So that was kind of like the thing there with that. And for me, when it comes to the welterweight division, um, I don't see the welterweight division as deep as some people may think it is. You know, I had named guys on the list already. If you got the champions, Spence, Crawford, Ugas, you got Keith Thurman, and people don't know what point Keith Thurman is at this particular juncture of his career. So then after that, it's Boots Ennis, it's Virgil Ortiz, and then if I go over the fighters that are ranked in the Ring Magazine rankings, you got Iman Stanionis, you got David Evangeline, you got Radzab Butayev, you got Connor Ben, and you got Cody Crowley. Those are the five guys that they kind of like put there in the bottom five of the Ring rankings. And I mean, I'm not sure if people are saying "whoa" when it comes to those guys that I named in those in the bottom half of the top 10. So Boots Ennis, unless if he fights one of those guys, like I said, a Keith Thurman or maybe your Dennis Ugas or Crawford or Spence, he won't have. I don't think he'll have that particular moment where he could say, "Hey, I have this victory over this guy." It might just end up being to the sense of we're gonna wait till whatever happens with Errol Spence, your Dennis Ugas, and Terrence Crawford, and then once that clears itself up, either those guys are gonna move up to 154 or they're gonna call it a day, and then you're gonna have whoever's left there at 147, and those are gonna be the guys that Boots Ennis will face. And if he stays there at 154 for a little while longer, he could probably clean out that division and then move up to 154. But as of right now, it will be a good little minute before a Jerron Ennis has that particular fight that says, okay, he stands out above all of these other guys.
Translation: Boots gotta wait his turn.
Correct. And it almost seems like the similar situation that Errol Spence Jr. was dealing with at a particular point when he wasn't a world champion, and he had to go through that same route that Jerron Boots Ennis is going. He had to put himself in a position to be a mandatory challenger for one of those championships, and then had to wait a little bit before Kell Brook faced Gennady Golovkin. And then after having that fight, then Kell Brook went back down to 147 to face Errol Spence. So now here we are, years later, and Jerron Boots Ennis is looking like the guy, the next guy coming. And like I said, it looks like he's going to have to wait his turn, just like, someone like Errol Spence had to wait his turn. So that's kind of like how that works out.
It's unfortunate, but it ain't no incentive for nobody to fight him. The guys that would make him quotation marks relevant in terms of like rankings and stuff, not relevant in terms of his position and skill, but relevant in terms of being a relevant piece of the conversation. There's no incentive. Everybody else done paid their dues. Would I like to see them fight him? Yeah, in a fanciful world, but it don't make no sense for Keith Thurman to fight him. Unless Keith Thurman on his way out and ain't trying to get no more belts and stuff like that, it ain't no reason for these guys to fight him. Like, I don't like that, but I just don't. He got to beat the Stanionises and stuff like that, clean them out, which is not gonna happen because they gonna keep those guys far away from him. I think he in a precarious situation because the top guys ain't gonna fight him, and then most of those guys who like at his level aren't gonna fight him either because he'll beat them more than likely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I was saying, you have those guys that are below Boots Ennis in the ring rankings. Virgil Ortiz is fighting Michael Mckinson, trying to position himself in that WBC. Um, and you have Stanionis and Butayev there in the WBA. Evasion, could have potentially fight like I said, a Conor Ben, but they're part of two rival promotional companies in the UK. Really ain't seeing that happen. And David Evasion is actually fighting on March 19th. And it's against somebody that's not really much in the rankings in any of the sanctioning bodies. So it's just something like a filler fight in some way for David Evasion. But Conor Ben's there, Cody Crowley's there. You might have a few other fighters there. Abel Ramos is there, and like I said, Keith Thurman still out there, but Keith Thurman is like, hey, if we don't have like a fight between Spence or Ugas, the Spence Ugas winner against Terrence Crawford, then I could face either one of those guys. And then outside of that, what else is out there? You know what I mean? So I'm not seeing like what other options there could be there for Boots Ennis. Um, and once he has his fight against Cassio Clayton, that's I think they're having it for March 9th. He gets there and he gets that win, then it's like, okay, what are they gonna do next? I know that there is like some type of a situation with the promotional deal that he's under. I think, but you know, in a sense, I think that if they could try to get Boots Ennis in a situation where he has enough interest from the fans, and and I would say, hey, have him in a fight and have him be a headliner. Um, Originally I thought that they were trying to have Boots Ennis versus Casillas Clayton as a co-feature to, I think it's the thing with Sebastian Fundora going up there um, against Erickson Lubin, and that would be the main event, and that Boots Ennis versus Casillas Clayton would be the co-feature. But if there was a situation where they could flip it and have Boots Ennis as the main event, then they could say, "Hey, people are coming out here to see Boots Ennis, and this is what they're willing to do or willing to pay, or they're gonna kind of like tune in on Showtime to see Boots in his fight. Unless if these other fighters see that Boots Ennis has enough that he could bring in a lot of money, then they're not gonna be that much interested in fighting Boots Ennis. Like you said, high risk, low reward. So unless if they try to get something to increase the reward for fighting Boots Ennis, then you're not gonna see a Keith Thurman or Terrence Crawford, an Errol Spence, or your Dennis Ugas fighting a Boots Ennis anytime soon. Or at least I don't see it. You know?
Not unless they go under Eddie Hearn, who would make a fight like that.
Well, I mean, if Access Industries is willing to invest their money into trying to get those guys over there, Access Industries has a lot of money. They actually recently put in billions of dollars towards the DAZN app. But that's from a worldwide perspective. That's not just for boxing. That's one thing that people gotta realize. The zone shows soccer, boxing, football in other countries, um, baseball, basketball in other countries. They get the rights to other sports in various countries, including this, in order to show it outside the U.S. So that's kind of like how that particular network kind of like works in that sense. But as far as like the overall budget for boxing, that's just a drop in the bucket, so to speak. So if they say, hey, Matchroom Boxing, Eddie Hearn, we'll give you this amount of money to try to make this fight happen, hey, maybe they could do that. I mean, shoot, Eddie Hearn lucked out and was able to get the fight between Teofimo Lopez and George Kambosos, but other than that, you got to see what else that they could do there for Matchroom, especially here in the U.S. because they really don't have that much depth as far as like who they could use and promote and push out there from that perspective. They do work with one particular person that's lightweight in Devin Haney. And, right now it looks like we are not necessarily getting a fight between Devin Haney and George Kambosos. It almost seems like we're leaning towards George Kambosos fighting Vasyl Lomachenko. It's not official, hasn't been official, but, we hadn't really seen anything that says like, hey, George Kambosos is fighting Devin Haney for the undisputed lightweight championships. And that was one of the things in the newswire that kind of like stood out was like you had a whole lot of back and forth between the parties of Devin Haney and George Kambosos, almost like, they were trying to, get a fight put together. But then now they're saying that potentially you could have a multi-fight deal with George Kambosos fighting Vasyl Lomachenko. And if, George Kambosos fights Vasyl Lomachenko and loses, that he could invoke the rematch clause, and have two fights. And I think that, that is kind of like what they were trying to lean towards is a multi-fight deal for George Kambosos, so that he could get the most lucrative deal out of what he has by winning those world championships when he defeated Teofimo Lopez. So it was like the option of, okay, you could fight, Devin Haney, you could fight Vasyl Lomachenko, you could maybe fight a Ryan Garcia, you could fight a Gervonta Tank Davis or whatever it is. But it's more about like, one, does he really want to defend those world titles in Australia, and how much would it take for him to have those belts be defended in Australia, and what opponent would make the most sense financially to, make that happen. So that's kind of like how that breaks down. And as of right now, it looks like it's more favorable towards George Kambosos fighting Vasyl Lomachenko there for those belts. I don't know. I haven't seen where it was, like official in that particular sense. But that's kind of like what it's leaning towards here right now is that George Kambosos is going to face Vasyl Lomachenko instead of Devin Haney. It looked like they're trying to set it up for June 4th against Vasyl Lomachenko. Would be in Australia over in like Marvel Stadium. And reportedly, I don't know if it's confirmed or not. I don't know because it's what I'm seeing it from is from Mr. Mike C, who has not been very reliable in a sense when it comes to news recently. So we have to see if it's going to be official that George Kambosos would fight Vasyl Lomachenko on June 4th over in Australia. But if that does happen, then it would be once again another instance where Vasyl Lomachenko ends up being quote unquote preferred to fight for at least one world title over Devin Haney. Years ago, a few years back, 2019, could have had Devin Haney versus Luke Campbell for the vacant WBC title at that time, and that didn't happen. It ended up being Vasyl Lomachenko versus Luke Campbell. And now here we are years later, and we could have the same instance happening again there. So it's kind of like a bad break in a sense for Devin Haney, but there may be some other issues going on with the Haney camp that I heard over the course of the week. Hopefully that does situate itself out, but still, it looks like Haney is just getting a bad break, so to speak. There, man. Boxing academic. Anything on that lightweight situation in Lomachenko? I guess getting another shot at those world titles.
The rich get richer.
Yeah, I find actually that's an interesting comment. Because for me, Vasyl Lomachenko as an opponent is quote unquote the most affordable opponent for George Kambosos. Like someone like a Devin Haney does kind of like command a pretty good purse for his fights. Someone like a Ryan Garcia would kind of command a pretty hefty purse for his fights. And I didn't even mention Gervonta Tank Davis because it's Gervonta Tank Davis, and nobody, I don't think, like nobody in the lightweight division makes as much as Tank Davis does. No, they don't. So it's more about who's more affordable, and it looks like it's Vasyl Lomachenko at this point is more affordable. So that's what we've got there.
Can I resend my statement and revise it?
All right.
The powerful get more powerful. How about that? That's more. That's what I went.
Yeah.
Not
there
rich.
We go. Yeah,
the powerful get more powerful. Thank you for clarifying for me.
There you go. Yep. That's it. That's it. Once you have somebody by the name of a Bob Arum that knows people and makes moves, then that's how someone like Vasyl Lomachenko is able to get himself in position to have these fights. Even though he has lost multiple times and has lost in the lightweight division, but yet he faces a Richard Comey. He faces Masayoshi Nakatani, and for some reason, those two bouts kind of, I guess, warrant him facing George Kambosos in some people's eyes, in comparison to a guy that's the world champion, a guy that had defeated Jojo Diaz, a guy that had defeated Jorge Linares, last year. but yet that doesn't, you know, get him a spot to face George Kambosos for the undisputed lightweight championship. So, those kind of like all the breaks there in that particular sense. So we'll see how that develops. Not sure uh, if that's going to be official or when that becomes official, but like I said, that initial report came from somebody that had a big miss as far as like a particular news tidbit over the course of the week, which I'll touch on here. As the last part, we had a little instance where you have, as one person likes to call him, El Campeon, Saul Canelo Alvarez, um, considering two fight deal from two different, networks or areas. One was going to be two fight deal. First fight against Jamal Charlo, second fight against David Benavidez. And the other side was first fight with D'Mitrius Ballard, second fight with Gennady Golovkin. One particular reporter said that Canelo Alvarez had, made the decision or was leaning towards the decision that he was going to face D'Mitrius Ballard on May 7th and Gennady Golovkin in September. But that was shot down by Saul Canelo Alvarez himself, saying that, hey, I hadn't made any decision yet on who I'm facing. So not sure where you got this report from, but as far as like me and my trainer and pretty much manager, Eddie Reynoso, we haven't said anything yet. So that kind of like shot that down. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure what direction he goes. But he could potentially fight all four of those guys. I would say if he would, say he goes against D'Mitrius Ballard and Gennady Golovkin, he could fight those two guys, beat those two guys, and you still would have Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez there in 2023. Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez are, in combination younger than having D'Mitrius Ballard and Gennady Golovkin. So why not, have those four fights? Hey, you're guaranteed at least $100 million or around that range for both of those, packages. So why not just say, hey, I can fight these two guys first, and I can fight these two guys later, and I still get paid over $100 million pretty much for, two fights in 2022 and 2023. Of course, for me, I would not necessarily be in favor of Gennady Golovkin having another fight with Canelo Alvarez. There have been a few media folks that have tried to push for that third fight. I never wanted to see a third fight. Was never interested in a third fight. Still ain't interested in a third fight. And especially right now, given Golovkin's, I would say his status, he is kind of like on the downturn, definite downturn. And I guess the only thing would be if Golovkin and Canelo face each other for a third time, that this could potentially be the instance where Gennady Golovkin ends up getting stopped. That would be the only thing that I could see happening if that particular fight does take place. Because Gennady Golovkin, if you all saw him against or in his last few fights or whatever it is, like he didn't necessarily look all too hot. You know what I'm saying? So, and there was like one instance where it almost looked like that he wouldn't have made it through one of those bouts, and this is a bout where he was going up against Sergey Derevianchenko for the IBF middleweight title, and he barely got through that fight. I thought he lost that fight. He gave him the decision. I thought he lost that fight, but after that, He hasn't really had that much activity. Only the one fight against Camille Cesaro. Yeah, he's slated to face Ryota Murata, like I was saying before. But he goes against Murata. They're gonna have to go ahead and try to have that fight take place ASAP. Because if Canelo plans to fight on May 7th and then fight again in September, Golovkin's going to have to add that fight against Murata ASAP. And if Japan doesn't, uh, like take those restrictions down or kind of like eases up on them restrictions, then it's going to be a good little minute before Golovkin gets in the ring. Is he in camp? Yeah, he's in camp, but they hadn't made no announcement as far as like when he's going to fight next. So there is that. But as far as with Canelo, he got a myriad of options. He's Canelo Alvarez. He can fight anybody he wants, basically. He's the cash guy in the sport of boxing. So wherever he goes, the majority of boxing goes as far as like the 168, 175 pound division goes there. So there is that. That's pretty much what I have for Canelo. Boxing academic, what do you think Canelo might do or should do in this case?
So I was doing two things, so I didn't hit a particular. So I'm gonna ask one question, then I'll answer your question if that's okay.
All right.
So do they have numbers associated with both deals, with the Bivol, GGG, and the what's the other one?
Charlo and Benavidez, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do they have numbers associated with both? Is it equal?
Well, it's estimated numbers.
Is it equal?
It's supposed to be around equal. But apparently, according to Samson Lekowitz, who is the major promoter for David Benavidez, he says that the offer for Canelo to fight Benavidez was more than $50 million. Apparently. So that would mean that the guarantee for a 2-fight deal with Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez would be northwards of $100 million and could have reached possibly, I guess, $110 million. But
versus the other one.
And the other one is just mainly that, $100 million or something like that,
Okay, and so $10 million difference.
Pretty much around that range, yeah.
Give or take. So equal or 10% difference, if that.
Right.
So my thoughts on that are, I got a long, windy road, and I'm driving, and I'm sleepy, and I can drive down the long, windy road and get to my destination, or I can hit the freeway and take a straight shot. No cliffs, no curves. I drove from Atlanta to Huntsville earlier this last week, and the route we always take is around cliffs and over hills and stuff. And I asked myself, if I was sleepy, I wouldn't dare drive this, because all the perils that could happen with being in a non-ideal situation would just make me say, even if the drive on the freeway was just a tad bit longer, 15, 20 minutes longer, I would take that one for the safety. Mm-hmm. Now, if I was trying to be great, okay, this is what my analogy kind of goes back to boxing. If I was trying to be great, which one would I choose? I would choose the one that gave me more for my legacy. But in regards to back to my driving example, if I'm getting to the same destination, the money, and I ain't really too much worried about the legacy, quotation marks, for self-preservation, I would see him taking the path of least resistance. I hope Canelo proves me wrong in my hunch and says he's going for the legacy and he knows that he can beat those guys, whether it's by, making sure you get a judge that give you the right score or whatever it is. he know he can beat them guys. I mean, I already got a lot of respect for Canelo. Canelo has earned what he's gotten. Quite naturally, he's favored. He handsome, so the women like him. He's learning to. Well, he already knew how to speak English, but he's speaking more English, which means that they're making a concerted effort to sell him to a bigger population, i.e., more dollars.
Exactly.
So I would have, I would just have to take my hat off to him again if he chooses the road least taken. But my hunch, he would have some big gonads if he chose the road less taken, less traveled. I want him to choose the road less traveled. And if he beat both of them guys, we got to stop with the, maybe he do deserve a few light touches. Maybe he do deserve. If he fight both of them guys, shit, maybe he deserve a few light touches, Like, maybe Errol Spence deserve a light touch. I'm just saying, I'm not taking it off Errol Spence. Mm-hmm. Maybe Sean Porter had a light touch with that smelling guy, with that,
Sebastian Formella.
Yeah, him. He had a light touch with him. But you get what I'm trying to say. Like, if he fights these guys, maybe he deserves a light touch. Terrence Crawford still got to fight a few more people before we start saying he got a light touch, because he's been fighting light touches. I love Terrence Crawford. Terrence Crawford may end up with the smoking gun after everything's said and done. But as far as Canelo, if he fight them guys, man, I'm going to have a lot of respect for him, even just taking the fight, because it's not guaranteed to win. Now, path of least resistance, which one will most people choose? The path of least resistance. So we'll see.
Well, I'd say the thing with the road thing that you were talking about, for Canelo, it would be the option of, are you going to take the straight shot, or are you going to take the scenic route? Or, in a sense, if you're going to go on an interstate, are you going to, go straight through, or are you going to hit a rest stop, along the way, or, hit a hotel, motel, Holiday Inn, to rest up before you continue the trip? I think that people feel like the path of least resistance, or the one that Canelo would be more favored in his fights against, are the ones against D'Mitrius Ballard and Gennady Golovkin. You do have Jamal Charlo. Yes, it would be his first fight at 168 pounds, but he's young guy, fairly young guy, someone that kind of comes down to 160 pounds. He's he's pretty solid guy. Before he goes down in weight, and he's fairly skilled guy himself. So that would kind of like pose a challenge there for Canelo Alvarez, and of course with David Benavidez has kind of like long been considered the guy at 168 that would pose the biggest challenge to Canelo Alvarez. So that to me is where you kind of like see him being a real challenge for Canelo Alvarez. If he does fight Jamal Charlo and ends up winning, then he would fight David Benavidez next. Then there's that. But like I said, with the option of D'Mitrius Ballard and Gennady Golovkin, it's more likely that Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez would be available in 2023 than D'Mitrius Ballard and Gennady Golovkin. So why not go for that guarantee first? You would have with Ballard and Golovkin, and then later on down the line you face Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez. So I think that if he does lean that direction with Ballard and Golovkin, then I mean that would be how it goes. From a financial perspective, of course, Canelo would get the guarantee, so it doesn't matter, for him in that sense. But for the networks, they would have to think about, okay, how are we going to sell this to people? When it comes to the thing for the zone, there was consideration that the zone would have a pay-per-view package on top of what they're doing with their monthly subscription or whatever it is. So it kind of like would be like an ESPN Plus. You know, ESPN Plus has their thing that they pay, people pay $5.99 a month or whatever the price is for ESPN Plus, but then you still have pay per view. That's kind of like how you had the fight between Terrence Crawford and Sean Porter. That was ESPN Plus pay per view. So for the zone, it would be that same instance. If they have Canelo versus D'Mitrius Ballard and then Canelo versus Golovkin, it would be like a zone pay per view package, so to speak. Now those that do have the zone or have heard of the zone and whatnot, and kind of like purchase things through the zone would not be, I don't think they would be happy with that. But that's kind of what they. I think that's what the zone would need to do in order for them to make money off of this. So that's kind of like what the direction would be if Canelo says, "Hey, I'm going to face D'Mitrius Ballard and Gennady Golovkin." Then it's going to be the zone pay per view. That's going to be how it goes. Especially when the last year Canelo Alvarez faced Caleb Plant, that was on pay per view, and Showtime pay per view had 800,000 or so pay per view buys for that particular fight. So if you know that he's that successful fighting Caleb Plant, then y'all are gonna have to y'all are gonna break the bank, and y'all are gonna have to go all in as far as like marketing, advertising the event, and trying to get that money back. So I think for Canelo's sake, or his decision, if he goes with Bivol and Golovkin, I wouldn't be surprised one bit, because you would still have those other fighters down the line, or at least most likely he would. But if he does go with Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez first, then I think a good number of people would really, kind of like tip their hat off to Canelo Alvarez if he does go that route first, because either way, and this was kind of like posted over the course of the week, like he's gonna end up getting criticized anyway for whatever decision he makes, because when you're a top guy, like Floyd Mayweather was, like Oscar De La Hoya was, there's always going to be some fighter that they come up with that they say that you're quote unquote ducking or not fighting. So regardless of who Canelo ends up fighting, there's going to be critics anyway. But in his sense, he's going to be making lots of money regardless. So whatever direction he goes, that's going to be his decision. I think with alongside his buddy there, Eddie Reynoso, and they're going to stick with that. So that's going to be how that situates itself. All right. With that being said, covered most everything there. We had action that was on Friday night. That was part of ShoBox. You had Paul Crawl against Marquise Taylor that ended up in a draw, where a lot of people felt like Marquise Taylor won that particular fight. Marquise Taylor was just jabbing up Paul Crawl, was landing well to the body. And Paul Crawl really didn't make many adjustments over the course of the 8 rounds. Where and the decisions just had it where Marquise Taylor had one scorecard where he shut out Paul Crawl, and another scorecard had Paul Crawl winning 77-75, and then one thing of 76-76. So an 8-0 card in one side, a 5-3 card on the other side, and then 4-4 even on the other side. So it ended up being a split draw. And a lot of people felt like Marquise Taylor won that fight. Jermaine Ortiz defeated Nahir Albright. Jermaine Ortiz there in the lightweight division is another guy that kind of like watch out for in the lightweight division. Young contender out there at lightweight. Was very solid in this fight against Nahir Albright. Albright was like overwhelmed in the first half of the fight. Kind of like was getting back into it in the second half of the fight, but nothing to really shift the scale over to where Albright would have had an advantage in the fight. So Jermaine Ortiz has scored a unanimous decision victory there in that particular bout, and that was the ShoBox New Generation card that was on Friday night. So that covers like everything that I needed to cover here. This particular episode, we'll get back at it on Sunday. Thank the Boxing Academic for joining here in this particular episode. Like I say, at the end of every show, point of boxing is hit and I get hit. Not the send and trade. On that note, folks, I'm out. Have a good evening, everybody.